by Kurt.
Good morning.
Morning,
Thank
sir.
you for allowing me a few extra minutes for my coffee to percolate. I appreciate that. I was a little bit late here. So Brett and I were just having a discussion of dealing with women, and you realize that they are in their own, that the relationship between a woman and a baby basically is very different from between a man and a baby, and that this is really telling. And I was saying, well, okay, well, the issue with women, and which we're just openly discussing, is this bell curve distribution of empathizing, right? So this side, you get it to where it's really you're empathizing with yourself, so it's this recursion, right? It's a crash basically. And the other side, you get the failure of it, right? There's no empathizing, and those, right? And then you get the antisocial personality, right?
Right.
So you have, and with men, it's you get the cunning bad guys on one end and the aggressive bad guys on the other, so to speak, and then the other dimension of it is you get the effeminate male or the autistic male, right? Just like you get the solipsistic male and a female, and the analytic female. And so you get these spectrums. So there's no recipe for humans. It's a distribution, because everything that it exists in, it's probabilistic, right? We grow by probabilities, and that's why everybody varies a little bit no matter what, right? It's all probabilistic. So it's all this probabilities working out, and that's why you say, well, I mean, it's 70 or 80% genetics and 30% we don't know what the hell else, and what the hell else is probabilistic chaos, that emerges from the interaction of probabilities during maturation, which is an incredibly complex process given the complexity of evolving a human being from a single zygote up onto to goofballs like us, right?
Right.
So if you take the women, though, they're in a pretty distribution. So if you say, well, the problem with women is it appears to be that the purpose of the female intuition and empathizing is to largely address children. That's my primary purpose. I mean, basically what's happening is you're in puberty, the girls are more empathizing in the first place, right? But during puberty, it gets exasperated. Why? Because you want the extension of the female's, now that she has the resources, she's adult enough, nature wants the extension of her perception to include her children as if they're herself. Right? I mean, it's not a rocket science, right? I mean, what's going on? It's relatively simple. It's like giving men more testosterone so that they're more aggressive, so that they're more likely to take on the responsibility for the tribe. I mean, it's the same thing from the opposite directions, one and many, right? I mean, one female to one, or the many of her little ones, and us to the many of the tribe together. So I mean, it's not rocket science going on there. It's just probabilistic distribution. So what I see in modernity is the combination of desocialization for both sexes, which has been exacerbated dramatically by the internet age, which I think all of us who study this problem are horrified by. I know John Haidt is, Haidt, whatever it is, Jonathan Haidt is, because that's he and I can't remember the other guy's name are working on it. They're really exasperated by the harm that's been done by virtualizing social interaction and the absence of the feedback loops that happen with compromise, when you have to actually, you're forced to integrate with people within your radius, rather than that you can not adapt because you can find other people who equally don't want to adapt. Right? So for women, you've got that. For both sexes, you got this problem a little bit, right? Well, for guys, we just go into gaming, and it's like forming a tribe anyway, right? Or sports or something like that. But so if women don't have children, where does that, like for men, where does the aggression go, the dominance expression go? Well, they don't have a choice. Men don't have a choice, right? Your dominant expression has to be in productivity, or in something, a sport or something. It has to go somewhere. And the more of it you have, the more you express. Now, I express mine in business and intellectual bullshit, right? But I mean, you might do it if you're fit, you're a big guy, you'll do it in, one of the sports maybe, or if you're a fast guy, you'll do it in, I mean, it's all, you're, if you're a hyper outgoing guy, you'll do it in sales. I mean, there's all sorts of ways for us to express it, but we express it that way. But if a woman can't express it because she doesn't have children, where does it go? Remember, all it is an extension of the self onto others, right? So she's just trying to put that energy somewhere, and it ends up in dysfunction, right? It ends up in dysfunctional behavior, just as if male behavior can't find an outlet, it will end up in dysfunctional behavior. But antisocial female and antisocial male behavior are different. Antisocial and female behavior tends to be under attention whoring, sexual promiscuity, gossiping, shaming, rallying, undermining, status perception, hyperconsumption. Right? I mean, it's all those very negative things that the Christian church warned us about as being the sins, right? I mean, it's essentially gluttony. And what's the other one? What's the one for whores?
Lust.
Thank you. So 7 deadly sins, so to speak. So for men, it goes out. It comes out in either self-destructive behavior, which women have the same, but which is drug abuse, etc., which is sedation, or it comes out in application, which is criminal behavior, right? If they don't get to apply it. And so there's always this problematic equilibrium between the tendency, the need of a person to have this energy of either female expression of attention getting, because attention getting is necessary for men and for children, men for resources, women for help, and children for control. Right? She has to have this attention capacity, right? That's a basic need for her to be able to survive in those three areas. So but what if that attention isn't being put to good use?
That's an interesting, right. It's an interesting premise that the attention is the resource that is used.
Right. And so, whereas men, we're careful about attention because you can get hurt. We have to earn attention. We can't demand attention. Does that make sense? Right. If we try to demand attention, we don't put up, men will hurt you.
The police will show up. That's true.
Yeah. Anyway, so
right.
I'm trying to get to this very simple point that men, there's not really an equivalent. Men without ability to demonstrate dominance expression, right? Competency, capital accumulation. They can usually find a way of self-entertainment, sports, porn, sports. I try to gaming, right? So right. There's all these things we do, and and of course in our world, the way guys do it in our world is political bullshit, right? I mean, they do it in dominant signaling by argumentation and political posturing and all this other stuff. So there's no really there's outlets for lots of men, but there's also not really a negative to not having an outlet. I mean, if you want to stay home and play, I mean, I can't imagine this, right? But if you want to stay home and play video games, I mean, I guess that's fine, right? But you're fine. You have some friends, right? You can live on pizza and whatever.
You're not causing social harms.
You're causing social harm. But women, they need that attention. And
so they're gonna act as some kind of, it's a distractor,
right?
Environment.
So their version of video gaming is getting attention. Their version of sports is competing with other women for attention. And so whereas, so it's like, okay, well, so the problem is women really sort of need children the way men need the military, is the way I traditionally say it, is that if you go in the military, you get sort of put in that position where you're full of yourself. Right. This is what reality is. And
Yeah, right. We're gonna teach you a lesson, buddy.
children do that to a woman,
Oh yeah.
right? By the same method. And
So
it's for the same purpose. What you're doing is you're domesticating that animal into providing a social good. And so there's just very few places where women don't become basically magical thinkers without the stress of children. And then without telling women truthfully about themselves, they have no way of knowing how to self-regulate. So in the past, we've externally regulated women, and we've somewhat internally regulated men. In other words, we taught men, right? So we tended to teach women through larger religion, which is why religions are generally distributed by women. Well, what does that do? It provides a social vehicle for training. We can provide an educational vehicle for training women so that they don't express, because the truth is, these things men complain about with women is like whoring and all this other shit they do, right? And gossip, shaming, rallying, which is I complain about, and voting badly and undermining their population. This is actually antisocial behavior. It's antisocial behavior in order to compensate for the fact that they either don't have children, or in the process of producing children, they chose a husband poorly, or a mate poorly. So, I mean, and then I don't want to, I can't get into this because I'm not positive yet, but it sure looks like the pill makes it worse.
and that's what it appears to be to me.
Yeah, the pill makes it worse because it seems to affect their amygdala.
I would make the argument, it's like it changes the equation of the risky associated with bad behavior.
Yes, correct.
And it changes the equation in the impulse control issue. And it's like I want to back up a little bit. It's like, so there appears to be men have surplus attention, which is to say they are a source of surplus attention. Women are a negative, they're a ground that absorbs attention. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? So that's the key dynamic, interpersonal dynamic.
So you just describing production versus demand, right? The men have a supply of attention, women have a demand for it, and everything they do, from their movements to their gestures to their how they care for themselves, it's all attention seeking, right? And it's all attention seeking largely by fertility signals. So I mean, if you don't constrain that, I mean, what you've got is an attention seeking fertility thing, or going out using these resources not for common good, for common harms. So the problem is, I guess, is that women have fought, especially the feminists, have fought for the way of expressing the female whatever. Well, it's like, well, men would like to express their male whatever too, but we do, because men are dangerous, we direct it toward constructive things like hunting and sports and gaming and all that other shit that we do in business, right? And politics and all this other crap we do. Mm-hmm. So we do it. So the problem with women is they direct it toward consumption.
Well, the issue is the men are restrained from application of their masculine dominance by the social norms.
And
well, it's the same thing. It's hard limits on that negative behavior.
Right, and so we haven't. Go ahead.
You just jumped to the conclusion in front of me.
Yeah, I caught myself, and that's why I threw it back to you.
You did a good job. That was exactly the right answer. The women are not properly restrained and they engage in antisocial behavior because we haven't restrained them.
So this is a solvable problem, right? The problem is it's very hard to convince women that their behavior is antisocial. In other words, right? Because they magically think their way out of everything.
Wait, it's like hard to convince the crook that he's crooked.
Right, exactly.
He doesn't have to admit it. There you have it.
Well, so okay, so let's take the naturalistic fallacy under our arms and see if we can carry that one.
Okay.
Which is that, well, one person say, well, it's in our nature to act that way, so why can't we act that way? It's our nature to rape and pillage and murder and war, so why can't we act that way? And it's the same freaking question. But your way is bad. I'm like, so is yours. You're undermining, right? Regeneration of demand, or all you're undermining. That's harmful. Well, we don't see it as harmful. Who are we hurting? Exactly. Right. That's actually the mindset thing of who are we hurting? You should expect that from that's okay. That's your problem. Right? They're externalizing all responsibility, which is what they do. As I say, all female behavior is reducible to the externalization of responsibility. All of it. There's nothing, anytime men and women differ in behavior, it's reducible to seeking responsibility and avoiding responsibility. That's it. There's nothing else to be taught. And it's really frustrating that that's the case.
No, I find it amusing, which is kind of funny because it really does that. And it's like, why is it frustrating?
Because we don't want it to be that way. It's like, I put it, so for the audience, this, Brad's more stoic than I am, right? It's also pessimistic than I am. I'm the optimistic idiot in our group, right? That's what it turns out to be.
Everybody has a role.
So I just want everybody to get along, right? And it's like, well, why can't you just be a good person and not be an attention whore? But evolution made them attention whores. What really bothering me? Well,
okay, go ahead.
And what's really bothering me is you start to look back into antiquity, and all this belief that women are oppressed gets turned around. Is that women are actually evil as hell unless they're constrained. And so men made other men constrain them because the men who constrain them are family, husband and father and brothers. And the reason is because they don't want to be, they don't want their women to be directly punished, so they constrain them. Does that make sense? They don't, in other words, my sisters were, I'm not too fond of my sisters, but if my sisters were wrong, right, I'd still defend them, right? In most cases. Well, I defend them from harm. I might not defend them for irresponsibility, but I defend them from harm. Hence why my sister borrowed my very nice 86 Toyota Celica Supra and totaled it. And I didn't make her pay for it, or do much to her at all, right? Okay. Anyway, the things we do. Anyway, but you're just enabling, right? So men made other men accountable for these women because men will protect their own. So in order to prevent men from punishing women who aren't theirs, they made other men punish women and contain them forever. But it turns out that women are fucking evil. And we're seeing this emerge. The more we give them, the more we have reduced norms and constraints, the more we have granted access to the economy, and the more we have access to the polity. What we find is they're basically destructive because their interest isn't capitalization, which is what the males and the government is for. That's what we have all this stuff for, is to increase capitalization, to decrease the risk and costs of persistence, right? Survival. Right? Okay. And so we've made it easier for our women, but at the cost of having to constantly constrain their evil behavior. Why? Because their behavior is more intuitionistic and less rational. Right? I mean, their feelings are more important to them, and they're more important to them because those feelings have to be to project over that of offspring, which is mothers, how all mothers and mammal mothers defend their offspring, to some degree. And so, but why would you do that? What's rational about defending an offspring? Now, it's evolutionarily explainable, but from a rational standpoint, these fucking things are costly.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Or they're expensive and they're really annoying. Right? And so that's why women have killed more of their children than men have killed each other in war. Is because they're really annoying and expensive. Well, I mean, can you imagine if women didn't have this extraordinary emotional extension of themselves, solipsism, onto children? They didn't have that. In other words, treat the child as if it's themselves. Then the humans wouldn't exist because, you'd just say, what the, what animal squirts out a child and just leaves it? I mean, it's like seahorses, right? I mean, and then, bye.
You're on your own now.
You're on your own. I'll drift away, and most of you are going to get eaten. Some of you will make it. So you can't have these high investment, long-term development offspring. In other words, you can't produce sentient beings.
That's right.
Unless you have this motherly care. But motherly care is irrational. It's not logical. So you're going to produce a woman who thinks emotionally.
Right. So it's like let's explore this a little bit, because that explains it nicely, because it's like it's the only equilibrium that is stable is if the women can believe all kind of crazy things that justify the sacrifice that she's making to keep that kid going, despite the irrational, absolutely unbelievable nature of those projections.
Correct. Absolutely. And so you have to be irrational to do that. I mean, to some degree. And so we say that, like, and people say, okay, modernity, right? We're making this judgment in modernity, but that instinct didn't evolve in modernity. It developed in prehistory, right? Because mammals have it, right?
That's
so
right.
We developed this thing all along. And we, out of that unreasonable care for children, is where the unreasonable care for each other came from, which has led us to cooperation.
Yeah.
And so, the urge to basically lactate and take care of a child evolves into our urge to take care of each other. I mean, everything starts somewhere. It doesn't start from nothing, right? No matter what with the human behavior we talk about, we can explain where it comes from. Right? I mean, they're all relevant because it's why? Because they're simple.
That's right.
Right, and they don't require anything complicated. They're all. It's like. Who was I talking to about triangles the other day? And I'm like, dude, the brain works by triangles because it's the only way it can be done. Right? I mean, the universe works by triangles because the only way anything can be done. Right? You have to have too much knowledge and planning to get beyond triangles. So there has to be some other form of intermediary form. Well, the nature doesn't have an intermediary form other than existence. So these things are always explainable. And so the net result is, yeah, but we've made it almost impossible to constrain women now, women's antisocial behavior now.
But that's because they shrill when you make the argument that we should, because they're going to defend their privileges.
Well, they're not. They're it's actually criminality, right? So when it's criminal, we haven't outlawed it. Well, I've explained this on the
right
before, that men lead the charge, so to speak, through evolutionary history. And so what's happened is men had a lot of freedom introduced since the end of the plague. We went through these sequence of revolutions. We got the restoration of Aristotelianism, followed by the plague, which created a shortage of labor, which created demand for labor, which created the need for the advantage of knowledge, which resulted in the printing press, which, oh my God, spread knowledge, which then, so this stuff went on. This has been an incredible ride for men. Women really weren't equally freed from natural limits the way men. See, we freed ourselves from natural limits by organizing and mechanization, right? Technique. But we didn't free women from their problems until the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And then we didn't free them from reproduction until the 1960s. So we haven't had time, we didn't look at these things and say women are absolutely this kind of person and they're going to do these things, although the anti-suffragist got scared, right? They were clear about it. But we didn't outlaw female antisocial behavior. In fact, we licensed it, and we actually heralded promiscuity for a while. And look what's happened is that we're literally having a population collapse. And it's largely in those promiscuous women that aren't Christian, that don't have stable families, because Christianity provides what women need in order to keep them from being immoral, which in our sense is criminal. And then, you have the men reinforcing it, which is the top X% of men who basically said, hey, instead of playing video games, I'm going to play women. I mean, that's what they do, right? I mean, it's
just a different game.
It's just a different game. I can play sports. I can play video games. I can play sports. I can play biz. I can play chicks. Chicks is like that. Playing chicks is like, if you're in that 10 or 20% of guys, you can just like call them up and they just show up, right? I mean, the number of guys I know who do this is just obscene to me.
Yeah,
I'm older now, so that means that I knew guys in the 80s and 90s who did this, right? So it's gotten worse, right? And so I can only project if the number of guys I knew doing this in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, right? It's really early 2000s. And then post 2009, right, when this whole internet generation sort of gets there. But I mean, it's like there must be. It's not like a fringe thing anymore. It's like it's a staple for a large number of men. I mean, it's not a large percent, it's 10 or 20% of men, but a large number of men, right? And the women, of course, and you can notice this. I mean, if you date a woman and she's sort of under your market, right? She's fucked up forever because she thinks she can get one of you. So when you date down as a guy, when you play these women, you're fucking them up too. I'm trying to get to the opposite side of what men are doing to encourage it. Right?
Oh yeah.
As I'm saying that men, a small percentage of men encourage.
Yeah, of course they are.
And
then, so it's like they're baiting them into hazard. And it's like we're just playing the baiting into hazard game.
Right. And the problem is because women are emotional, they're not rational. They think they can get that category of guy, but he is just like treating you like
it goes to this.
There's a bag of Pringles here, that Pringles can, and you get a Pringle with a beer. It's like this great combination of beer and Pringle and beer and Pringle and beer and Pringle. Well, I mean, the women, they're just Pringles. There's nothing else other than, that tasted good. And besides, I get some exercise, right? I get ejaculation, I get exercise. I plowed through you, I kicked you out of the house in the morning, never called you back, right?
Right.
I played you in my right roster.
Right. The funny thing is that the females that are riding the roller coaster are they don't think they're playing. They think this is serious and they're going to get the guy, catch Chad. Because they don't have to
say. I actually disagree. I say they will say they are playing. Right? They will say they are playing. That's their cover. they actually believe they're gonna get something. Right? There's a bunch of them when young, it's like, well, I'm just getting it, it's just attention whoring,
Right.
and they're usually not that attractive.
So the issue is that they're going to have all kind of magical algorithms running in their mind that justify their behavior to themselves.
So my lovely, beautiful ex is messaging in the corner, and because I'm a man, my brain kind of gets.
I respect that.
Whenever that happens, you know, a beautiful woman messages me and says, "Hello, my dear," and I'm like, I'm gonna turn into an idiot again.
He commands the attentions.
Right.
I get it.
She's actually worth the attention, which isn't something I can't say of most American women. Anyway.
I understand. I understand.
So did we
Yes, we beat the war drum.
well, we did a pretty good job of covering the equilibrium problem. And that we've said we've got to simply prohibit this behavior. Now, the question is, do we really have to prohibit this behavior? I'm exploring this. I don't know the answer.
Okay.
So the markets tend to correct over time. And this is a market. The problem with this market is the consequence, the broader consequences of the marriage, sex, reproduction, marriage, and family market is way more costly over time than the failure of economic markets in time. Does that make sense? The market for families is a long production cycle.
Yep.
And the market for goods, services, and information are much shorter production cycles.
Right.
And,
what you're saying is there will be a bigger scar.
Exactly.
Social environment.
Right. And so, which we're seeing right now in population collapse.
Yes. Self-limiting problem. The issue is that there's an isolation issue, which is it's necessary to isolate yourself. The polity needs to isolate itself from the damaging effects, because those act like free radicals in creating social harms. And you need to create a barrier that keeps them out, because they're too dangerous to have in your collective social space, because they're going to demoralize the good ones in your proximity if they are there. Which goes to that video that that Catholic gentleman was making, the priest, that we looked at last week, on Thursday, excuse me. Mm-hmm. Because he's like, he named the name of the demon that's associated with the various behaviors, and that is what we're troubled by. Is that's a demoralized, each represents further states of demoralization. Mm-hmm. and the demoralization is a transmittable it's a social disease, because they act as a example, and you don't see the damage being done because it's over time, not in time. Mm-hmm.
So, you said you want. I'm sorry. Did you finish that arc? Because you touched on religion, and I know you wanted to talk about religion last night. So,
a little bit
more. Do we have more to talk on religion now? Because I don't want to. I feel like if I go on the female male subject longer, I'll just repeat myself. So.
Okay. No, we're good.
So you have any more on religion? If the audience hasn't seen it, we did a piece on Thursday, and I'm going to talk over it about
that is so garbled.
Well,
that was very garbled.
Okay. The name of the video
is the 2023-04-13 chat hyphen translating religious speech, translating religious speech. And I think that is, I mean, I can't put a long title for everything, but that is one of our better videos and one I think you should watch because it talks about the different arcs, both the, in other words, I generally talk about the post-war arc and the Marxist woke sequence and the female audience for the Marxist woke sequence. And I don't as often talk about the pre and post-war American or Anglo strategy of ending the end of empires and the rise of sovereign states and free trade between sovereign states. So I don't talk about that arc very often. And furthermore, Brad and I covered the arc of religious speech to computational speech and how those three things fit together. And I have no idea what that sounds like to somebody who's just listening to us. It probably sounds like
It sounds like English, kind of.
what the fuck is he talking about? You'll get it if you watch the video, I think. So I mean, if you have the attention span, you'll get it. That's one of our better videos, I think, because we it's like there are only so many arcs to history that explain everything. Right? There are arcs of scale, and so it's sort of like a lightning bolt type of thing, right? It goes here and then it branches out in these directions. So there's only so many arcs that you need to explain all of human history that lead us up to the present point. It's not really that many. It's like a lot of things we do. They sound really freaking complicated because you can't see how they fit together immediately. But there aren't actually that many arcs, just like there aren't that many fundamental first principles in the universe. Just like there aren't that many components to natural law. Right? I mean, it's not,
unbelievably simple.
Once you sort of can get your head around what all the terms mean, it's unbelievably simple.
It's really unbelievably simple. It's gorgeous in its simplicity.
So I would recommend you see that because Brad does a great job of pulling this Catholic. Was your priest a priest or is an archbishop or priest?
I don't know what his status is.
The men with funny hats.
He's got a funny hat, I'm certain, but he's not wearing it in that video.
Okay. So we're talking about the men who generally have funny or often have funny hats.
No, I think that they always have a funny hat. They just don't always wear their funny hat.
So
they call it a miter for the audience. I don't know why.
I like to take all religious headwear and call it funny hats.
Funny hats. Okay.
I want to be equal in my disparagement.
I see. I don't know that that's necessarily disparaging, but okay.
I didn't mean it to be.
I understand.
So, so he comes out and he compares. He uses the demons of the.
And I wanted to, that's why I brought it up. I wanted you to discuss because I regard it as he's talking about programming. Because we talk about daemon, DAEMON, is a software program that operates in the background in the shadows, unseen by the user interface.
I agree. So what you want to do is, when you say that, is you want to say, let's take a present thing we're aware of, an analogy aware of, like a daemon that's running, on a computer. In other words, when you're working with a computer, if you pull up like what processes are running, there's like, zillions of them, right? They're all doing little goddamn things now and then, right? I mean, so the daemon for transmitting this video is back running in there, right? It's running. And so the application talks to the daemon, which then does its job communicating to the outside world. Right? The daemon just stays on. So a daemon is a thing that keeps going, even if you're not paying attention.
Yeah, it actually does. It is designed to not attract your attention.
Exactly. It's behind the scene. It's invisible. It's running down it. Well, so in the sense that you mean it, I'm going to science it, right? Which is that the priesthood uses suggestion
in other words, analogy, to use an anthropomorphic model, in other words, something that is a symbol, a character that is a symbolic embodiment of a set of personality and behavioral traits, to create a demon in your mind. Because personalization, or it's like, why do cows like other cows?
That's not what I'm talking about. It's kind of, it's what the priest has done is he's created a descriptor that is common between people for behavioral sets.
Yeah, I just didn't get there yet.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Right. So an archetype is a system. Basically, this suggested archetype becomes a standard of weight and measure in
Yeah.
a population. And this is the most accessible form of language available to people. And what that means is you and I have been trained to be empiricists, right? Most of us, right? Some of us are trained to be rationalists. Some of us are trained to be empiricists. Some of us became scientists, and guys like me were computationalists. And so these are increasing degrees of precision. And the thing is that, that's just packaging. In other words, here's the deal. You can deduce anything from computation, basic laws. You can explain anything causally. But it's like the problem of qualia versus experience, right? So versus existence. Existence exists. Your perception of existence might be slightly different from mine, and your perception of qualia might be slightly different from mine, right? Now, but we can measure existence. I can't measure your experience, it's in your head, and I certainly can't manage the qualia in your head. All right. We can only do that by competing against each other against an external reference and determining the differences. Does that make sense? The most common one is color scales.
Right.
So, because people see colors slightly differently. Color blindness being the obvious one. So the priest uses this incredibly accessible. It's basically the equivalent of machine language. An archetype is basically the equivalent of machine language for humans. So an archetype and a narrative,
right,
is saying it is a hyperbolic, usually an exaggerated version of a set of personality traits. And so he was programming by people by installing a daemon, but that not just for the individual, but that's a standard daemon which everybody can carry as a standard weight measure for understanding in the most basic intuitionistic common terms what happens. So that's the appeal of myths and religion, is that these things are actually systems of measurement that we can look at and understand pretty much equally. Whereas our understanding of the world after that might increasingly diverge to being unequal in perception. In other words, the farther we get from intuitionistic embodiment and anthropomorphism, the farther we can diverge in what that experience means to us. And that at some point, which I covered in the other video, there's like the maximum, which is probably history, right? The maximum amount of meaning which can be shared. And after that, you're basically removing emotions. You're removing experiences, and you're increasingly working with measurements. Now, what's a measurement? An admission of the impossibility to experience it. Does that make sense? A measurement is necessary because you can't experience it.
Okay.
To create a standard of weight and measure. But if you and I learn about Baal,
yes,
I can't remember them all, and can't remember them all.
Asmodeus.
Asmodeus. Asmodeus, right? So there's some song out right now that mentions all of them. I can't pull it up in my head, or I could probably recite it from the song. But once we're taught about those characters, or Luke Skywalker, or Frodo, or it doesn't make any difference, right? Once we're taught about those characters, or Robin Hood, right, or Alexander, right, or Thor, it doesn't make any difference. That becomes a standard of weight and measure in our intrinsic standard of weight and measure, embodiment, personality, human differences, hyperbolically exaggerated in order to make them clear.
Right.
And so, but the farther we go away from embodiment and into like, you require all this extra knowledge, and because everything's increasingly so. So when I talk about, the ternary logic of the universe, how experiential is that?
It's none.
It's none, right? If I talk about let's take something scientific. If I talk about something in a chemical reaction, how experience is that? It's if you're a chemist and you work with it, you can sort of say, okay, well, this is what's happening, and model it.
Right.
It's not an experience, it's a modeling, right? It's an abstraction. So I mean, it's logical that I guess the only point I'm trying to make is we shouldn't really denigrate mythology and stories and fairy tales, because
it's very powerful.
It's extremely powerful, creating a standard of weight and measure of behavioral expectation.
Right.
Those demons are like our computer. We're like an interface on our computer, right? Because our personality is basically, when we think of our personality, it's the interface part, right? All the other stuff is really intuition. And so when we create a demon, now it's inside our intuition.
Okay, wait. Okay, so like I'm going to query you because I'm interrogating your construction of that sentence. When we create a demon, what does that mean?
When we create a myth that with an embodiment of one or more characters,
okay,
a story. A myth. The difference between a myth and a narrative is that you're allowed to have you're allowed to violate the three principal laws, but you're allowed to violate the occult to supernatural spectrum, the magic to pseudoscience spectrum, and the sophistry to idealism spectrum. In other words, you're allowed to, there's also, and the hyperbolic. What?
Go ahead, I'm listening.
And then of course, this is for the purpose of hyperbolic understanding. So in the Western tradition, you teach boys and girls about princes and princesses. There's a reason you do that. It's because you want to be as responsible as a prince and princess. But you want the resources of a prince and princess, because otherwise you can't discuss what it's like to have the resources to do things. So in a sense, being a prince and princess and having the resources of prince and princess is essentially magic. It's saying they're magical, but it's not magical. It didn't violate magic, right? It just used hyperbole, which is an exaggeration.
Okay.
So, am I going too far?
Well, I haven't got what I'm just bearing with you. I'll hang with you.
If I'm losing you, I'm losing the audience. So what I was trying to get is, you asked me a question. I said, well, no, you need myths because they're a demon. They're able to create a daemon, which is an intuition.
That's right.
Right. You're able to create an intuition with one, because that intuition is in the language of embodiment.
Yes.
Does that make sense? It's in the language of embodiment and social interaction, right? So if you can create a language of embodiment, that can run as a demon. And when that runs as a demon, it basically creates an intuition in you that doesn't require you to reason. And we know what happens with reasoning. It gets increasingly abstract and increasingly dependent on measurements, decreasingly dependent on more and more information. Whereas what information is necessary to judge people and political and social behavior by demons installed in our natural machine language of human beings, which is intuitions of embodiment.
Right.
Right. So it's much easier to create a standard of weight and measure in a myth. In a myth, a parable, a fairy tale, etc., a legend. It's easier to create one because that becomes a standard of weight and measure of your group evolutionary strategy.
Yes.
Right. And so demons, right? Daemons, Or I usually do it. A daemon runs in a computer, and a demon is a thing that's going to get you in the night, right? So a daemon is can be installed in a person, and they're as important to the individual as they are to the computer, because it may know how to interact with the outside world without those demons. You may not know how to interact with the other people without those demons, because protocol, right? That's what a lot of demons do. They take information from here, they translate it into information necessary for there, right? And that's where the scary stuff happens. So you translate it, but it's a protocol. Well, what happens when humans are being taught to work together? We get a standard weight measure. Now, the standard weight measure requires a protocol. The protocol is language, right? I mean, it's the narrative structure, and the data structure is something to do with embodiment, and the original data types, which the types they're all built from, are the properties of embodiment.
All right. So the way I'm thinking about this is that the priest was talking about demons, and they're named demons, 5 of them, and they're characterized by different behavioral invocations cause that demon to be operating in the social sphere.
Yes.
And these have been talked about for thousands of years.
They survive. Yes. Why? You know why they survive? Because they're actually true archetypal representations of combinations of human instincts, right? That's why they survive. They're not false.
They're not false. And so the issue is this: is the demon is evident by virtue of human behavior. Okay. And when you allow the demon in the social space, which is you legitimize the behaviors that invoke that demon, there are costs associated with it, which is there's social side effects. And that's what he was talking about. And he was talking, and it's computation.
Right.
You know, he's just, and that's what was amazing to me, is watching the man. And it's just, this is the computation as it occurs. Five steps.
I want to come back to this because this is something that will help me understand you and other people in a minute. Right? So I want to come back to this topic.
Okay.
Get to this. Okay. So the problem with the arc of embodiment to computation is the degree of us is that you can make associations, but you can't make deductions. Whereas computations, which you can make deductions. So this is the problem I have with theology, is when people start deducing rather than inducing or associating. And so when somebody says, well, they said this is true, I'm like, well, it's not true for the purpose of deduction. It's true for the purpose of explanation. And so it doesn't mean you can deduce for anything from it. This is like saying, this is this equivalent of saying premises in set logic are always assumptions. But premises in computation are facts, laws of the universe. And so the problem with theological argument is that if you can figure out how to explain something with theological argument, that's different from trying to prove it. Whereas in computation, you can prove it and explain it. The problem is deduce from it. So this is the fundamental issue, is the reason you want to go from embodiment through history through computation is that you want to be able to perform deductions and proofs
of something rather than just explanations of things. Right? So you're stuck at the level of precision of the thing you're doing. Now, because mythology is in general imprecise, right? This is the whole point of it. You can explain a lot of shit with it.
Right.
Right, because it's basically the codification of human behavior in what's called mythicism.
Hmm.
It's creating theology is basically very sophisticated fairy tales.
Yeah.
Right. And so what happens is that these fairy tales survive. They survive because as explanations in the language of human intuition, they're true. Are they true for the purpose of writing proofs? They're not like mathematics or constructing logic, but they're certainly explanations of something. So what I like is you can move from, and who does this? This is like Peterson's gig, right? He goes from theological history to Kantian to Jungian archetypes, to the science behind it, right? That's his thing that I get frustrated with and I appreciate, is that he's using the whole goddamn series.
Right.
He's going from mythology to rationalism, right? Reasonableness, or it's basically I don't want to call it pseudoscience, but it is, right?
Philosophical.
Okay, let's do it that way. From mythology to philosophy to science, and he does all three. And he does that specifically because when he's trying to communicate to students in class, he's trying to say, here's the science you need to know as a psychologist.
Right.
When he's trying to talk to the audience, he's going to use Jungian philosophy. And when he's trying to reach the guts of the audience, he's going to appeal to mythology.
Right.
And the ability to use all three of these allows him to increase precision and decrease precision. And so what happens is he can say, he generally does mythology in this way as proof, durable proof of the persistence of human psychology in social narratives. Right? He's trying to use Jungian framework to say, okay, let's turn that into what's roughly personality traits and an archetype. So you take these incredibly diverse archetypes. This is the thing I was going to explain earlier, and I'm like, should I go sideways or not? But you take mythological archetypes, which are all over the place, to Jungian archetypes, which are measurements, to scientific causes. And the fact that he does that, you need to appreciate. I mean, as an intellectual, I appreciate how hard that is. It's really, you have to master all three domains. But when we talk about, there's 500 dead gods, right, or 700 dead gods, whatever the fuck there are. Right? I know the list of 500, but somebody said there's 700 and something the other day. I'm like, you might be right.
I know where they're buried, man.
So I mean, all these characters, right? They represent variations in time and space. Like, I mean, it's so the mythology of Europeans, of Indians, of Chinese, and of Semites varies quite a bit because their gods are actually relationships between either them and the natural world or them and their rulers. The way the Semites view rulers is very akin to how the Chinese and the Europeans view the natural world. It's like fucking nuts, right? So there you are. I mean, the Semitic view of rulers, right, is if you're nuts, you're evil, and so they have these devils, right, demons, because so. But I mean, if you look at Chinese spiritualism, it doesn't have all that stuff in it, right? It has things like dragons, evil spirits. So the point I was trying to get here is that if you start out with mythos, they're not universal, but they contain universal structures. So an archetype is usually constructed from a truth, but I may not understand what Bachman, I may not have any equivalent of these great demons or angels in my religious background.
Right.
But if you go to Kantian, go to Jungian archetypes, now you're created a system of measurement. Right. So you create an intermediary stage. And then when you go to science, you say, well, this stuff all originates in personality, behavioral traits, phases. So that's why, and I get frustrated. I really wish you would do less. Well, that represents the great mother, right? And I'm like, I don't fucking know. That means something to you, but it doesn't mean
It doesn't compute.
doesn't compute. But if you put it in Jungian terms, I can at least translate it. And if you put it in scientific terms, I absolutely know what it means. So it's just who can hear what language.
That's right. It's like this goes to I was pondering the logics and grammars
Yes.
in the context of the Einstein quote I brought up last week, which is I'm looking for it in my book here. Einstein's quote. Gosh, give me a moment. The issue is the issue is that Einstein said you cannot solve the problems that were created with a certain class of thinking by employing that same certain class of thinking.
Correct.
And so it's like the way I would apply that to this conversation is that each civilization has its own logics and grammars associated with it, and they're at odds with each other.
Yes.
And that's what we call culture wars.
Yes.
And so we're coming to grips with that and figuring out how to work within the logics and grammars that work best. And you would say that's the group evolutionary strategy.
Yes.
For the group. And it's like there's a competition between these in a mixed social environment.
Correct. Which is really fucking costly. I mean, we don't think of it as, well, you're using this currency and I'm using this one. And you're using this sets of weights for whatever, and I'm using this one. And this set of volumes, right? But those are trivial compared to, your perception that you're oppressed and my perception that you need to be domesticated. I mean, those are two different words, or that you feel that we say it's just responsibility and you consider it oppression. And what are you supposed to tell a person? Guess what? You're not able to do whiteness, and you're raised in a family and environment that's anti-whiteness, and you wonder why people interact with you and they dismiss you. They don't trust you. They don't want to work with you. Why? Because you're working with different weights and measures, and they can't. It's like, I don't want to have to do the work of, whenever I have to do with somebody across cultures. It's basically figuring out the math. I don't want to have to do the math.
Well, it's more work.
Well, I don't have to do any math. I just can intuit it.
Well, it's interesting, as interacting with I had an extremely wide population of patients among the online work.
Yes.
And so I've experienced this, and it's like I see it in regionally, I note a difference. Then ethnically, I note a difference.
Yes.
And between men and women, I note a huge difference. And it's okay. So it's like, what's interesting to me is it goes to this stoicism, which is like this, is like just quiet down my own reactive nature.
Yes.
and observe.
Yes.
And take the time to observe.
Yep.
That's all it is. And it's like, what
you're saying is, this is interesting. Quiet down your own nature. Are you talking about your intuitions
Yeah, you're gonna have a natural response when you deal with anybody.
Yes.
And it's like that responsiveness is my intuitive response to that presentation of the person with whom I'm having a social interaction. And that reaction is not likely to improve the efficiency of the interaction. Because it's the demons are the noise. They're generating noise, social noise.
Right. But they're efficient in group and inefficient out group, which is, I think you would.
Oh yeah. No, it's frustrating because it's like it's time consuming. It's just time consuming. Because it's like in order to cause the person to understand what I need them to understand, it takes more time.
Yes.
And it's like, okay,
And let's give you credit though. This is also the other problem. I make the smart people. I have smart people disease. You have smart people disease. This is a problem, right? As we have in other words, smart people tend to do a certain amount of things. As we assume that other people can do this. In other words, we're not equally able to sit there and listen and turn the volume down on the demons. Would you agree with that or no?
it's a lot of work.
Right.
A huge amount of effort is required to generate that self-restraint.
Right.
And then so then it's like what I do is I just project my I'm watching the person and I'm like, I'm not doing anything besides I'm not going to get impatient with the person, which is an option. But it's like I'm going to observe the person and go, what it is, just try to understand what it is they need to express that's taken so damn long, right? It's like they need to work something through, and there's an information process. So I'm watching them process it with their background processors that they aren't aware of probably, which is their little demons, right? And it's like, so that's all it is. It's observation and understanding.
Yeah, but that's again, how many of us can do that? We were talking about the hyperbolic, the women. I mean, go watch. What's her name? Pearl.
Yeah.
Watch Pearl's, the women at Pearl's desk every day, right? I mean, it's ridiculous the level of denial and justification of just depending upon instinct that exists.
Yes.
Right. Or just look at the women's complaining about men videos.
Yes.
Like it's the most solipsistic nonsense, justification nonsense ever had. So if it's the thing is, can it's like we're talking, the reason I'm bringing it up is like the lesson I learned this week, which is, I have to mount this shit in my head, right? And I use the analogy of when I started programming, you saved your program on a computer punch tape, which is about that wide and has a bunch of holes in it, right? And so you save this, you run this thing through a mechanical process that reads the holes in the tape, loads your, and at the time I was doing this, it could take, if I had an hour session with a computer, which was expensive back then, right? It could take me 25 minutes to load and 25 minutes to save damn tape, right? I mean, it was like, so to me, I see that as the same as like when I'm working with stuff. Can I hold that in my head right now? No, I'm too tired.
Right.
Can anybody else hold it in their head? No.
Kurt gave the error message. The error message was that was a failure to load.
Yeah, I just can't hold it. Right? So I mean, I can't hold it when I'm tired, but I mean, I can hold it easily when I'm not. Right. But most people just can't hold it. That's well, it's the same thing with you're talking about, is that some of us can sit there and just shut. I mean, I have CEO face, right? I don't know. It's different from what you're doing, right? But there's a similarity.
Yeah,
right?
there is.
Listen, sorry?
Yeah.
When you're a politician, you keep it on this way, smiling while you're listening. But that's all you're doing, right? And then me, I have a straight face when I'm listening. And you're more like, you're sort of in between. You've got to have the I'm listening face on, right? Which is, but in the background, the politician or the CEO or the doctor, you do the same thing, which is you're trying to shut down all this other crap to see if there's any facts in there that I can turn into something useful and use whatever I get out of you
to figure out how to frame something so that you can understand it.
That's it. So there's a, it's okay. That's a useful, that's very interesting, which is there's, data acquisition, signal noise, right? Pulling the signal out of the noise until you have enough signal to make a decidability.
Even that, even for me, it's like, how can I even ask you, like, how can I even carry on this conversation, right? Because I can't figure out even how to reduce it to something that you'll grasp, right? The other person will grasp. And so there, in other words, how, you can at least talk about, how they feel, right? Or what they did during the day, right? That's probably reducible. You can figure something out. But I mean, I know how hard your diagnosis is, right? I mean, you say, well, the ones online aren't as hard as somebody in office ones, which is probably true.
No, some of them, it just requires you to go, understand what I'm trying to understand what it is that, because I started, have someone just blank, you don't know what you got.
Yeah.
And then they explain what's going on. And there's categories, but one category is they attempt to load the whole tape on your head.
Yes.
And it takes a long time. And it's like, sometimes I don't think they'll stop. I think they'll just keep going. And then I interrupt them. That's when I figured that out, when I decided they're never gonna stop. But it's like, it's kind of interesting. It's like, okay, you just let them run they're running a subroutine.
The patient doesn't know what's going to stick on the wall of the spaghetti wall. What spaghetti is going to stick on the wall of the doctor's mind, right? You don't know. So something must go along. But on the other hand, from the doctor's standpoint, I don't know where to start asking questions because I need something to work with here to be able to form a deduction.
Right. So the interesting thing is that, so it's observing the person and then figuring out what exact routine is running in their head.
So that's the demon problem. The more close the demons are, right, the running processes, the easier it is to figure things out between each other. And that's neural economy, right? I mean, so a standard of weight measure, a demon, right, is a reduction in the cost of neural economics.
Okay.
That makes sense? Because that's for me, the problem is I can't do this. I can't have this conversation with you because the amount of knowledge it would take for me to actually get you to be able to talk to you is too high a price to pay. I run into that all the time. I mean, I just, I can't. I mean, I'd love to, I can't do it. I mean, I'm not willing to. It's a too high. If you have that set of ideas in your head, that you'd have to be pretty fucked up to get there. So my chance of correcting all that before we can even have the discussion is impossible, right? Right. But that's but you can, if you're in the position of telling me, the person may not be able to even know how to express what they feel. Or the problem I run into as an autist is we feel things way more subtle things way more intensely, but we have no idea if they're meaningful. So we have to tell the doctor all this stuff because it's like, I have no idea,
right,
that this is meaningful or not, right? So I don't know. Tell me if it's meaningful. I'm an autist. That just means everything's like more intense. So I mean, it could be that this is like a digestion problem, right? It's like or it's nothing, right? Which I want to hear. It's okay to tell me, oh, it's nothing. It's ridiculous. But I don't fucking know. So you have the people who have too much information, too much articulation, but don't know the answer. And you have people who don't have enough intuition, articulation to be able to explain how they feel to the doctor. I think your job is fucking hard. I mean, that's just my, my head would explode.
It's interesting. It's okay. So I'm not observing me now is how it works is I'm like observing me and how I'm functioning to try to optimize my satisfaction, right? Which is like what's going to make me happiest, right? And why am I doing what I'm doing? And why am I not doing what I'm not doing, right? And how is it helping me to acquire what I would prefer?
Yep. Well, but that's like, so here's the question I'm trying to get at. So I attribute my knowledge of people to early Dungeons and Dragons. This is important because I had you, if you want to be really, and I was really good at that game. This back before there were computers, right? I mean, you had to do this. I don't know, it was where there were many computers. And the whole thing is you have to keep people entertained. And so you have to keep all these people in your head. And so you can't make sure that one person's having all the fun. And so you're trying to plan out how to do this. So you're sort of, you have this setup placed out, but you have, this story you're working through. Because I basically tell stories.
Right.
And, I got to where I had 30 people playing the fucking game, which is a lot, right? I mean, it's an audience, and we would have like 70 people show up to watch.
Huh.
So I got this out of how do I manage people through entertainment? Right. So that's my first one. In other words, how do I keep them engaged? And so I do that in management teams too. I try to keep everybody engaged. You'll see this if I'm talking to the staff, even in our staff videos. I try to move around a little bit to make sure I get everybody engaged. But it's the same in my head. I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
The second thing is sales. Right. Is when you have to sell things to a whole bunch of people, you have to learn very quickly about all the falsehoods we're taught about people.
Yeah.
Right. They're all false, right? All that stuff. I mean, because everybody's actually the difference between us, like the difference between people in your social class and in your social cadre. In other words, the group of people you associate with. The variation is very small because that's why you're associating. Neuroeconomy. Right. So, but the problem is when you get out in the world and you're like I'm talking to, some high executive in some company, right? Some middle executive in company and some low-level executives in company and some employee, right? I mean, it's like, wow, these people are from different fucking planets. And then you switch industries. That's why I can't work with the government. It's like, I want to kill all you people. You're just awful, right? I mean, I don't really mean I want to kill them, but I mean, I can't work with you. You're just the incompetence and laziness is beyond my comprehension. Irresponsibility is beyond my comprehension.
It's
only slightly less bad working with universities, and slightly better working with hospitals.
It's like a feminine cognitive environment.
Correct. They're not meritocratic environments. They're not market competitive environments as these. And markets are what make you moral. Gee, why does that so obvious? Why do middle class societies tend to be more moral? Because everyone's a customer. So anyway, I lost my train, man.
You were talking about managing people through entertainment.
Oh, so you get these things, and then the third thing you get is through management, right? It's like from playing games to, and the truth is sports are in there too, right? So I skipped over the sports part, but that's like too natural for everybody. We all get some sports, so I don't think we're. But then you get management. You're managing people, and especially if you're managing very talented people, their wants and dreams and fantasies are all over the place. So how I interview everybody, I treat everybody's like, what does this person want over the next 20 years? And so when I'm interacting with you as an employee, that's actually what I'm thinking. How can I get you what you want in exchange for what I want?
Yes.
Right. And it's really that's how I think about the problem from its highest level. So the question is that desocialization? In other words, that's a kind of hyper socialization arc I just described.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now you can have a different kind of hyper socialization. You can talk about the high street bimbos, which I don't know if you know what that means. It's the bar chicks, the nightclub chicks in London, right? And the guys who feed that stuff. It's like all that stuff we talked about earlier, and I'm happy for them, right? I mean, it's not above me. I've gone into a nightclub and with 20 people and I've bought a table and paid for all this stuff, right? Because because once in a while that's fun, but I'm doing it because I want to make my staff happy, not because I could give a shit, right? So tying it back is you've gone through and you've said, well, you've run through, you said 27,000 or 30,000 people basically.
27,000 was the report in March.
Right. So that's how many patients you've seen in just how many, it's not even that long,
I think 7 years.
7 years, right? That's obscene, right? I mean, obscene in the sense of the person can't imagine it.
No, it's a town. It's a town.
The town, you've met everybody in a town, right? And had to understand them and figure out how to communicate with them.
Right, right.
Now, so so this ends to be the problem I see is not only we desocialize people, which means they can't talk to people they could ordinarily talk to in their geographic radius. But we have people who hold opinions and they've never been responsible for those scales. And they've never dealt with people across those scales. I always find that I could talk to salespeople and CEOs. Why? Because they understand people. And it's almost like, you know, I mean, doctors are the same, you understand people. I mean, I think of it as CEOs.
Right.
And there's
No, I understand you. And it's like that's interesting because it is like because it's like it comes down to how big is the sphere of people in your proximity that you have interacted with. And it's like some of them have a wide circumference, some of them have a very narrow circumference, and desocialization is smaller circumference.
And so, and the other thing is that, you know, it's like complaining about people who have higher status than you. You know, I've met some politicians that are really profoundly moral people. Absolutely profoundly moral people. I've met priests that are profoundly moral people. Financiers, though less of them, much less of them. So I find that most CEOs tend to be pretty moral people if they're not in the financial sector. In other words, if they're producing goods and services. So it's just their morality is bounded by the length of the distance of their responsibility. And so the problem with that hierarchy of responsibility is you're trying to make sure everything's moral at the level you're working.
Right.
That might produce the perception of immorality down here somewhere. Or it might actually create a real immorality somewhere.
Oh, I see it.
Right. But you're not out there trying to do anything immoral. It's just the due diligence you're capable of doesn't happen until you see the error. In other words, you're a business guy, you come up with an idea, you start organizing whatever, you think you're doing the right thing. But there's a tertiary or quaternary effect out there somewhere that turns out to be actually harmful to somebody. But you don't know that because you can't envision it until it happens.
Right.
Until it comes back up to you, like, God damn it, how did we screw that up? And a lot of that is because the secret to, you know, good to great companies is that the criteria for decision making isn't equal along that path. It tends to become pragmatic and
Right.
And that pragmatism, which sounds rational to the person at this level, actually produces an immorality or irreciprocity at that level. And so there's this complex shit that's going on all the time. So what you find is that, you know, it's pretty easy to be forgiving after a while as you scale up the organizations you manage for those reasons. We're all incredibly different. We all have incredibly, we all have different, so I want to not forget this. We all need relatively similar demons, right? And we don't all have, right? We all need to have sort of approximately an understanding of how our part fits into the whole.
Right.
We often don't have it. There are often parts of what we do that we think are efficient that by third order, fourth order effects cause someone else to do something wrong. Mostly it's government is like that a lot. Right. And so all these things happen. And you're like, well, so the thing I'm getting to is it actually takes a lot of socialization to not be an idiot.
All right.
Does that make sense? So,
Sure.
you know, you've done, I've not dealt with thousands of people, you know, with thousands of people, but we're also mature guys. We've had this whole life. If you talk to me when I was like 18, right?
Right.
And my very macho 18-year-old 1970s, mid 1970s with my long hair and my chest open like this and my, you know, and my black shirt and my jeans and my fancy belt and, you know, and my car. And I thought I was hot shit, right? I had stupid ideas in my head about the world. We all do, right? So I mean, the problem is you have to outgrow your stupid ideas by increasing the radius of your thing. So
Exposure, yeah.
you know, I talk about the people I admire most, and it turns out that most of them start work early, like really early. You know, if you get kids started at 8 or 9, like I started at, I think 7, I started with you could start anything at 8 or 9, earning money. Holy shit, it's like completely rewiring the brain. If you can, if you think church doesn't matter, it fucking matters. Just to have us sit there and go through the paces, right, and say the words, it actually turns out it matters, right? So what do we? So I'm trying to get to what this desocialization problem is actually neurological. It's fucking catastrophic.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
catastrophic. So what are we going to do about people who are increasingly working in smaller globes? And they may not see anything except their phone, the fucking television, their video games, and their work. And their whole world is built out of knowledge of just that. What do you do about that? I'm asking you a question. It's not, I know it's rhetorical because no one knows the fucking answer.
You wait for the solar storm to knock the grid down, and that's what happens. It's like that depends, because it's like you go, what's this technical dependency, right?
Yep.
And it's like, okay, what happens to the junkie will fail.
Yes. So that's the actual argument in that you come to, that whatever you all come to is that you have to let the system fail. It's like the argument for junkie addicts, right? No, why does no single method of curing addiction matter? Why? Because none of them matter. What matters is the addict, right? If it works for him, that's great. But it was actually him that made the decision to no longer be an addict. The people who die are because the problem isn't the process, it's them. They were gonna die. And we run out of time, or can I ask you one more question?
We can talk.
I felt like I didn't
No,
do
we're good.
in that arc here.
No, we're good.
So this is a question that is actually meaningful for me, and I know you can feel this, but I still can't figure it out when I try to ask you about it. Why do we care about these religious myths? In other words, I actually can't get it. Like, does it make sense? Is it just that, you know, I went to raised Catholic. I went to Saturday church school. I went to a private Catholic high school. You know, I just can't get why these ancient myths. I don't mean that. I'm really talking about like I can basically understand the story of Noah and the Garden of Eden. This is what right, and I can understand the parables, but I don't understand why for some people that is extraordinarily meaningful. In other words, their frame is there versus their frame is in literature or history or philosophy or science or communication. What is interesting about it? Is it just whatever we learned first is more associated? Like, what causes that interest? I mean, you're fascinated by Hebrew and
I find it amusing, sir. It is because it's like a microscope, okay, that provides information that is not otherwise available. And so it's like I gain insight into current events that was not otherwise available.
Well, so what you're seeing is where I tend to see the concept of the archetypal character as perpetuating through time. What you're saying is the insight and the legitimacy of a civilizational concept persisting over time as useful. Is that right? It's conveying meaning to you, understanding and meaning. But why would you choose that one versus a different one? I know, I just.
Yeah, it's happenstance.
Okay.
And it's like it's accident, and it's like it's like you okay, you're a miner and you're in the desert and you're digging around, you follow the vein. You're interested.
What vein to follow? We'll just follow a vein you find, right? Yeah.
Find the one that's there and you work it until it's exhausted, right?
Right. Because you kind of blow me away pretty often with this stuff. I'm like, Jesus, I wouldn't have thought about this.
Well, I didn't think of it.
Well,
To me, I didn't think of it. See, to me, it's like this. It's like that. What I'm doing when I use that tool set is I'm looking at what great thinkers from way long ago did and understanding that vibration as it presents itself today.
right. So
It's true.
okay.
It has some truth.
It is, and that's. I think you just answered my question, which I'm trying to, in general. So if I look at the data, religiosity is based on two factors: empathizing higher than systematizing, and screwed myself up there. I went down a rat hole. Empathizing versus systematizing and indoctrination, early exposure. Indoctrination is the wrong term. It's early exposure. Consistent and early exposure to the frame. And third, excuse me, I forgot the third one. And the third one is social reinforcement.
Yep.
Of that frame. There's basically three things. And that just goes back to if you're a miner in the desert and find a vein and the vein is there and everybody's saying, good vein.
Right. So what it is, though, there are systematizers more than empathizers that are participating in the frame. They're generating the signal.
Yeah, excuse me. I wasn't meaning to go there. So what you're saying is elites will always form under any institution, religious institution. So these elites will be systematizers, right? I mean, that's right. Duh, right? I mean,
Sorry, Kurt. Duh.
No, I didn't want to have it come across that I was saying that people in religion where there weren't systematizers in religion. But if you look at what the Abrahamic theology consists of, it consists largely of the fact that Jews had law and the Europeans had law, and that this is really the reason for the success of the two cultures is that their primacy of law, right? And then how did the mythos build from each culture? Well, what the Jews did is they incorporated Greek reason into their theology. They tried to make it structural, right? And they basically copied the framework that the Greeks did for the epic cycle, which is the religion of the world, the civilized world before Christianity. Just like the Christians copied the Jewish model. They took all this stuff in order to make it a copy of the Greek epic cycle, and they took Greek logic and brought in Jewish mythicism. And it's easy to understand why, is that these are religions of different classes. European religion is aristocratic top down,
And Semitic religion is priestly bottom up. And so you get the empathizing to systematizing, and you get the systematizing to empathizing in the Europeans. I mean, it's, when you look back at it, it's like if you know what humans will do, because it's like we're bots, it's actually pretty obvious what happened, right? So you had two institutions that started out with the premise of reason, Jewish law and European foundations of our own. We don't think of it as law, but it's law. And so those two things came together and they collided and they produced, philosophy, science, and empiricism on one hand, and Christianity, Rabbinical Judaism, and Islamism on the other. And these are just empathizing versus systematizing. Now, systematizing requires higher IQ points. So there's a tendency for us to become a little more atheistic as we grow in IQ. But we've banished the idea that it's IQ is what makes you religious. In other words, it's religious people aren't dumb. They're just empathic. Right.
Right.
So I think I got my question answered, is that the data says it's these three things, right? It's early empathizing, early exposure, and reinforcement. And there is some negative consequence to people like me, hyper-systematic. And otherwise, that's the only real difference. So as long as you raise your kids to be reasonably Christian, they'll probably end up being reasonably Christian. Duh.
Right. It's like so the issue is that the what you call religiosity, I presume to be churchiness, like,
yes,
which is organized institutions to intentionally generate intuitions within the youth.
right. So in other words, I'm a fan of religion. I'm not necessarily a fan of churchianity, which is an attempt to make a political system out of it. So, right.
Oh, that ties in with that the Noahide people,
Correct.
which is imposition of religious law in a state.
Right, which is not the place for it. It may be that religious ethics end up as secular laws. In other words, religions may discover and state a premise that over time is determined to be true, which should then be codified in the law as a standard weight measure. That's what happens all the time, right? But there's a difference between the reciprocity and irreciprocity, right? Which is, in other words, if it's secularly convertible, it's probably right. If it's not secularly convertible to secularity, it's not. Except for when you get to, here's my favorite one. There's only this is the only God, and you should have others before you. Well, it turns out that state. It's not that you need to have a state-run religion. Is that it's a really good idea if states prohibit alien religions, which I would have never believed.
I know that's an anti-liberal statement.
Yeah, I would have never believed that, but that's absolutely true. Is it? That you should. It's absolutely a problem to allow competing religions in their authority. It's fucking horrible, and I would have never thought it, but it's because they manufacture demons.
That's their job.
Okay, I covered a lot. We covered some great shit today. It's been our 2 hours. So have I done my job today? Are we done okay?
I think so.
The voice is starting to go.
That's it. And so tomorrow we work on the Constitution again.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be in.
That'll be the plan. If not, we'll talk about something else.
I had a lot of fun in this discussion, Brad. Why was this so much fun? Oh, it's because you solved a hard problem for me.
That was a hard problem.
Well, it's not a hard problem. It's one I have an open question.
It's,
No, because what you're saying is just something else. I would appeal to history for legitimacy. You're saying the same fucking thing, right? You're saying that these people had insights. They were smart people.
right. And they're talking about something real, and it persists in time. And it's like there's some value to that. There's signal there that needs to be acquired and understood, and then adapt. Like run it as a program. What does it tell you about the things you witness yourself, or have witnessed yourself in an embodied sense, right?
Yes. Sorry for the one distraction there where I was trying to get to, well, look at the how serious the desocialization problem is.
It's very disturbing.
And I felt like I went too long on that one, bored doing that one, but.
No, it was okay. It's just you're looking into the abyss a little bit. It's like, oh my.
It's just too hard.
Right. So we tell the people this, it's like the issue is it's the same. So we talk about it in this demon terms. It's like the people are like very upset because these I would call them demons. The human beings are possessed by their demons, and their misbehavior is so appalling, right?
Mm-hmm.
It causes you to shrink back, right? And the issue is this is like it's good that this provides a valuable service, because the demon appears out of the shadows and cause you to recoil towards the light, right? And it's like that's that was the religious conversion of a comedian. He gave it as testimony what he said, and it's like this is good, but it's not as dark as it's going to get, and there's going to be more of this misbehavioral nonsense, and we're talking about it with these this desocialization issue is part of it, right? And it will become increasingly evident the damage that has been done, and it will cause a retrenchment of the people towards pro-social by intention. That's what I think.
I didn't finish that. Arc was I wanted to explore. I'm tired now. So, but I wanted to explore the arc of well, I mean, will the market correct? Because there's some signs the market is starting to correct. Right. I just think that because we talked about the correction time of the mating market is really fucking horrible.
That's right. Right, because it's like it looks like there's going to be population collapsing while we're correcting.
Right, and
that's just how it's going to be. It's like,
that's the problem, is you don't come back from it. It's just going to happen. What we're doing now, I think I wrote this the other day, is it's somebody made a great case. What's going on in the world is far worse than the Great Plague.
Yes.
And it's voluntarily produced. Oh, so I started working on that a bit. I'm like, can I do some napkin sketching? Right. Well, having the world fucking population doesn't look like a bad idea. It just depends on what are the consequences of having that population based on who has.
Right.
Right. It makes a lot of difference who has. And it's not a good idea that, given that Europeans are the only ones that survived, that brought about empiricism, science, and reason, reciprocity of law. They're the only ones who did it. And we almost failed a couple of times because we had the Dark Ages were incredibly damaging. So I said, well, if we were to lose European civilization, that's way different from losing Orthodox or Islamic or Native Australian. I mean, those are huge. Those, they matter, but they don't matter in the sense that it doesn't look like you get many chances to develop a civilizational strategy. It looks like you sort of get one.
Yeah, you got your one.
You get your one, and you're just stunk after that. And so if you have to collapse entirely to restore it, but that takes a founder population.
Well, where the hell are we gonna get a founder population that doesn't already have a strategy that's wrong? So I just can't quite figure out how we get out of the mess. If we have we have the world population halve, which is, looks like it's gonna happen. There'll be a market correction because we're right now falsifying urbanization, right? We're falsifying urbanization. We might be falsifying women in the workplace. We're falsifying universal democracy. We're falsifying the premise that we can change a group's evolutionary strategy and therefore create a world of federations and sovereign states and free trade. So we're falsifying a whole bunch of these very Enlightenment premises, right? That turn out to be that we've run an experiment, a very Christian, a positive Christian experiment on. Turns like they're all false. So I mean, if Europeans don't, our civilization doesn't make it, why does the rest of the world make it? The rest of the world failed by 800, and we would have failed if it wasn't for, it wasn't for a couple of accidents. The Muslims driving out the scholars back into Europe, which was repopulated Europe with the classics, the Greeks, and the fact that there was the Mediterranean was still conquered, but the North Sea provided a new economic equivalent to the Aegean and then the Mediterranean. And then, from that, we got the combination of that restoration plus that economic boom got us the Atlantic phase. And we only got the Atlantic phase because the Muslims were dumb enough to close off the trade routes to Europeans, the ports, right, to Europeans. And we only did that out of necessity. And all of a sudden we discovered the planet and we had a fucking frat party, so it doesn't look good. I mean, doesn't look good at all. And there's no, I mean, you see India I'm sorry, am I running on too much?
No, I'm good.
India returning, you can see India's drive back to religiosity and nationalism because they just became the biggest population this year. And that's fine. I mean, if it's going to happen to anyone, I'd rather it happen to them. Right? Kind of fond of Indians. Crazy as crazy and as somewhat effeminate as they seem, they're adorable. I really hope the Chinese government fails because you do not want that to persist. That communist shit is fucking evil. So I don't know. It just seems like we're a population on collapse that's not relatively evenly distributed. Means that the aggregate IQ of the population regresses to the mean, which is probably somewhere in the mid-80s, which means that half of the population is too stupid to be. That's fucking horrible. So anyway, now we're going to need those ancient wisdom guys that you were calling on to preserve something. Anyway, that's my rant.
That was a good one.
All right, man. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll do some work. I woke up this morning. I didn't think I could do this, but I can. So tomorrow, I hope I'll be a little better case. It's like I experiment with a food once a week.
Yep.
See if I have to cut that out. And so far, I have to cut them all out.
All the foods?
Well, it's like if I eat meat, eggs, dairy, or just milk, basically, butter, and a salad, I'm okay. Right, but it's like I can't eat anything other than that, or my nose fills up. Anyway, love you, brother. We'll talk tomorrow. Thank you for this. This was really meaningful for me because a lot from you today. So thank you very much.
Wait, I gotta tell the guys.
Okay.
Hit the like and subscribe button and that notification bell right there, and then leave the glorious comments.
Really preach the comments, guys. I try to recognize every comment that's good, and I try to respond to every comment that I can. So thank you for what you do. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Bye-bye.